Welcome to a new episode of the Simplex Digital podcast. Today we have Nicolas Weber as our guest in our podcast. Nicolas is the founder and CEO of the Meta Game Hub DAO, founder and CEO of the DAC, Decentralized Autonomous Company, worked several years in different roles in the blockchain space, and we're happy to have you here on this episode today to talk to you about the metaverse. Welcome, Nicolas.
Thank you, Stefan, and pleasure to be here. Really excited for today's show.
Great. Maybe to jump directly into the questions, we want to talk about the metaverse. Maybe could you describe the metaverse in your own words, or what is the metaverse for you?
Yeah, I think that's a quite common question. I feel like that is out there a lot, right? Because there's a huge, I feel like sometimes misunderstanding or maybe better misalignment around what people describe as the metaverse, right? Some people call a single meta world as a metaverse, right? Others are speaking about the whole pie. There's not really a clear definition out there, right? That also causes a lot of confusion, which I think is a huge issue. The term itself has been obviously kind of also abused a bit over the last 2-3 years, right? A lot of hype in the media in terms of actual execution. I would say it was not at all on par with what had been promised. A lot of projects, I've been traveling a lot, meeting a lot of metaverse projects. So the metaverse term itself, I think, is quite a difficult topic. And the easiest way for me to describe it is simply a new way of engaging with the internet, right? So it is kind of aligned also with the general development of the web, right? From web 1 to 3 now, which we are entering. And the metaverse can be seen kind of as it's not technically correct, but a front end of that ecosystem, right? Where we on the one hand have, the immersiveness that is added to the 2D layers of engaging with the internet currently, right? Where we are constantly engaging online, but it's only 2D, right? On websites and applications, and moving from this to 3D, whether that's AR or VR based, let's say, experiences within that domain, where I feel like it's sometimes people also misunderstand it as something like a game, right? Only I would say it's more the gamification, right? So rather than going to a 2D website where you have information listed or where you have a marketplace, you go into a 3D environment, right? Where you can purchase the items, right? So it's still going to be similar logics in terms of transacting, however, just with kind of that immersive layer on top. And then what we've seen as a last part there, really in the last 2-3 years coming up, is more also the let's say Web3 combination with that metaverse vision, right? Where we make digital value tangible, right? Through the tokenization. And that's where kind of then the metaverse and Web3 also connect with each other. Of course, the metaverse itself can be even connected with AI and other technologies, right? Just generally like the web itself. So I would say it's kind of the bigger pie. So I don't like to call like these individual worlds, whether they are 2D worlds like Fortnite or Roblox, or 3D Web3 worlds like Sandbox or Decentraland, or Web 2.5 worlds like Spatial, right? To me, they are all worlds, meta worlds, if you wish, in the big, so to say, pie of the metaverse. That's kind of my overview, I would say, of this space. However, I think it's really needed that we create a general standard, right, in the industry, that everyone is on the same page, where eventually we move from having to even understand what the metaverse is to just intuitively utilizing it.
Maybe to jump directly into that, because you mentioned also Fortnite or Roblox or Valorant as games, and a lot of people often confuse. They say metaverse is equal to blockchain. What do you think about that? Do you think metaverse has to be blockchain, or can it also be other technologies as a base layer?
I feel like generally, like with technology, the metaverse, so to say, in that sense, is neutral, right? It can be with blockchain, it doesn't have to be. I feel like blockchain itself through the respective tokenization on top, right, provides, let's say, a more seamless transactional layer, right? Most of the Web2 worlds in the, if you wish, metaverse, so to say, because we can even say this, what we're having right now as a conversation on Zoom could be part of the metaverse, right? Like it always depends on which perspective you're looking at it. And they're basically, these Web2 worlds are very siloed, right? The user data is siloed, the assets are siloed, everything is in its own kind of space. And that's where, especially from a value perspective, you know, the blockchain part can provide a huge value in terms of seamlessly transferring data, respectively, in terms of maybe the user profiles, other information, as well as especially value from these different worlds, right, to others, and developing on the one hand, of course, in a much needed standard for the scenes, right, which is actually there's a universal scene standard out there, more from a front end perspective, and then on the other hand, from a transactional layer, right, that's where the blockchain again comes in, to develop a standard to move these assets from these different worlds. I mean, a lot of parents know it, they have kids, they pay, you know, for them purchasing virtual assets, right? More in gaming, of course, but the metaverse in gaming is very tightly related, right? And therefore, you know, just a simple use case is not being able, or a simple enhancement is, right now you're not able to really, once you, it's a one-way street, right? You purchase these items, the kids play with it, maybe half a year later they're not interested anymore, and then the money is gone. With the blockchain part, you are able then to actually move these items from these different worlds, right? Trade against them, sell them maybe for new items in a new world that now the kid is interested in, right? These type of use cases, I think, that are quite powerful. So I would say the seamless transfer of value, as well as especially the data interoperability, is where blockchain can and has to provide the main benefits. However, thinking about the current status quo, also on that side, I would have to say that there's a lot of players in industry and associations striving for this standardization, right? There's, for instance, the OMA3 Foundation, there's the Metaverse Standards Association. I think even the EU is now pushing toward data standards around the metaverse a little bit, right? Or generally metaverse related topics, right? So there's a lot of movement in that direction. With MetaGameUp, we are also supporting more an educational initiative that is powered by MetaGameUp called Centauri, where we're educating businesses, right, and students around generally the bigger scope of the metaverse. However, still most is very fragmented if you really look at the clear use cases at the moment. So even the Web3 meta world, so to say, are still fragmented, and that's where really the need is to work towards that. Blockchain can actually solve that.
Then maybe jumping to the next question, because you already introduced some points of my next question, is where do we currently stand at? Which point are we at? Well, if we think in a hype cycle, I think we had a big hype in 20, 21, 22. Now in 23, it went a little bit down. And we also saw that Facebook changed its name to Meta, started to develop a lot of stuff for the metaverse, which has not really quite worked out yet. Let's say yet, because we never know what's will be coming in the future. So what do you think? Where are we currently at?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, because it is there also more about which perspective you're looking at it, right? If you look at it from a perspective which I tend to be more fond of, which is basically, you know, like I said earlier, you know, even this, what we're doing right now could be considered, you know, as a part of the metaverse, if you wish, right? Then I feel like we are pretty advanced, right? Most people, at least the majority in the world, has now access to internet. There's still a lot of improvements that need to be done. There's still a lot of people that don't have that access, but I feel like the majority still does now, right? So everyone is, you know, at least from that majority, already part of that digital ecosystem that, at least to a certain extent, allow the further democratization of access to at least information, right? So I feel like on that perspective, really, we are quite advanced, and it's just accelerating, right? I mean, there is generally this belief that technology growth, right, is always accelerating according to Moore's law and all these ideas. So on that side, I believe that we are quite advanced, and we are constantly using all these online applications. Right now, we are actually looking again for ways to kind of unplug from the digital world. I personally actually believe that the more we enter the digital sphere, the more we will also, again, as a species, so to say, look to unplug even and look for more physical and let's say non-digital let's say experiences. It's just my belief on a side note. So I think on that side, we're generally quite advanced. However, if we really look at the Web3 vision of the metaverse, we are very, very early, right? There's a low amount of users. Most of the projects that, for instance, were raising capital over the last 2-3 years, that were launching tokens, that were pushing some products, others didn't even go to that stage, right? I remember last year I was in Dubai at the Metaverse conference, and I think most of the companies that I met there, I don't know what's happening with them, right? If they're still doing something. And I think what happened also in the last 12-18 months is kind of like a cleanse in the market, right? Where people realized, as well as, for instance, Meta, that we are not yet there where everyone was maybe believing us to be. At the same time, while a lot of players are scared at the moment, you have, for instance, Apple coming out with their glasses soon, right? Which a lot of people in the industry also believe to be a huge boost again, right, for this economy. So I think it's kind of like an ambivalent stage that we're currently in, right, around the metaverse topic. In terms of Meta specifically, I think, of course, when it comes to their 3D worlds, and I have to say I'm neutral towards Meta. I don't hate them. I don't like them either. I'm more neutral, right? I think everyone is at the end more or less trying their best. So their virtual worlds, of course, like most of the virtual worlds, actually, even the big players in Web3, they're I wouldn't say maybe all of them are failing, but they're just super early, right, in terms of the user amounts and proper adoption. However, if you ask a random person on the street about the metaverse, if they know about the metaverse, often they will connect the VR glasses, right, for instance, primarily of Meta, the Oculus Quest, to the metaverse, right? So I think especially on that side, actually Meta has done quite a good job. Maybe from a financial perspective, not so much. They are heavily subsidizing it, of course, right? But still, right? It's hardware that also needs to be on par with the technical development in order to onboard the masses. So I think kind of right now is actually a good opportunity, I believe, because the right people are still building, right, that are serious about this topic. There's a lot of still opportunity and interest, especially from the B2B side, I would say right now. The retail side, not so much, because for this, we first need the right infrastructure standards to be implemented. And now is the opportunity to strive toward that, to build that. And basically then once kind of the overall sentiment in the industry changes again, I believe that then we will start seeing the general, let's say, earlier stages of proper adoption. I think if we generally look also at the overall Web3 space, I mean, we still have layer ones, layer twos raising crazy amounts of money, right, rather than applications. So I think in overall, as of course the metaverse and Web3 are in at the moment at least very tightly knit with each other, right? I think generally that application part really, once the infrastructure standards are there, especially data standards, is where basically instead of, let's say, kind of overwhelming the user with these large worlds where there's 100 things to do, but is there really something you need to do, right? I think it will be the very straightforward and simple applications that solve an issue. Like, I don't know, you go to a social media app for a specific purpose, right? You go to Amazon for a specific purpose. you go to, I don't know, Google for a specific purpose. And I think we need these more straightforward applications around Web3 and respectively the metaverse for it to really kick off and everyone to use it seamlessly. Yeah.
Well, I believe that also the people are underestimating the data that you need. I currently just heard about a game which will be released, I think, in the next month, which spent like 12 years of development and 500 million in development budget. And there you see that you have like real worlds where you create the data, the graphics, and you can like walk through the world. And if you look at Sandbox, or if you look at other worlds, you seem to look at them like Roblox, like from a graphic design, maybe a little bit better than Roblox. And I think people want to have like real world experiences in there. And I think also like internet speed has to evolve way faster, that you have like a seamless experience within these worlds. Because currently, I don't know if you live in a small village within Germany and you have like, I don't know, 50 Mbits, then it does not make sense to move to the metaverse with the high graphics, because it simply will not work. You will get stuck. You will have loading times which are way too long. I think all the infrastructure around it also has to evolve, and therefore it might go faster. We mentioned a few players in the space, such as Meta. Who do you say else is like a big player? What which comes to mind is like a working space, Microsoft. Maybe you can also dig a little bit deeper into Microsoft, and maybe also into a few Web3 companies, and where do you see them at?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think in general, basically, just to the before I jump on this, to what you mentioned also in terms of the infrastructure. I mean, since I'm back in Germany, I've just been having trouble actually with the internet, so I can totally relate with what you mentioned, right? And also what I've realized actually, what is a good low-hanging fruit is actually phygital, right? So for instance, we've done things with fashion companies, especially in Latin America, you know, different fashion wear, like jackets, hoodies, and t-shirts and other things. And that's actually something where I see people, you know, they don't necessarily have to deal with the metaverse, but they can buy the jacket and then they see, oh, I can also use it in this world, so I'll try it out. And, you know, then you start kind of dealing more with this topic. So I fully agree with what you mentioned there. And in regards to the companies, I feel like, to be honest, most of the major Web2 companies, you mentioned also Microsoft, of course, I mentioned Apple, right, with the headsets, the glasses. And I feel like most of the Web2 conglomerates are in some sort of way dealing with the metaverse, or at least started dealing with the metaverse, right? Of course, now everyone is all over AI, but AI and the metaverse still has also a way, right, to work with each other, especially to give, so to say, life to AI in a sense, right? That's where the metaverse can provide a lot of value, and I feel like there's going to be a large growth as well. So I feel like, yeah, even Amazon, right? They're exploring some use cases. AWS anyway is a strong player in the Web3 space, right? With the cloud part. Then you have Google, right? They are also now, I met some of their team of Google Cloud, for instance, in Hong Kong a few weeks ago. They are also now heavily more pushing than before toward generally Web3 infrastructure that they want to provide, but also around the metaverse. But I do feel like actually one of the biggest industries and consortium of companies actually that is doing stuff in the metaverse is actually the luxury industry and fashion, right? So for instance, the LVMH portfolio, you have a lot of very well-known brands that are all doing something within the metaverse, right? And actually, I feel like there, as it still relates to real world items often, right? And it has that phygital part that I mentioned also before. That is one of the most successful industries that start adopting, and all these large companies from the LVMH portfolio, you know, are doing and trying use cases. There's also this initiative that they launched, Maison the startups or something like this, it's called, where they are always connecting innovative startups right now with a core focus on Web3 and the metaverse with their portfolio, right, of luxury brands. So that's like, I think, also a key industry. Then other players are also in sports, right? So there have been a lot of, I would say, bad attempts around onboarding the sports industry and the large sports clubs, as at the end also companies, right, into the metaverse. However, you know, it's, as sports is so powerful, right? It's obvious that you know, it's just a matter of time till it actually there are use cases that work. One of the partners, friends of us, Fitchin, their company, co-founded by Kun Agüero, the soccer player from Argentina. For instance, they are targeting the esports communities, right? And Kings League, which is a initiative from Kun and Gerald Piqué, right, and others, where actually, especially around esports and streaming, right, I feel like that's a large use case as well. And for instance, major teams globally, like Cru, that's Kun's team, or Giants, a large team from Spain, right, are entering the space. So I feel like these are actually the companies that have the most tangible use cases. So around strong IP, whether that's luxury or sports, or something that is also at least starting to pick up is, of course, music, right, and the convergence there. So I feel like, yeah, generally the broader spectrum of traditional well-known IP holders and companies around that topic, as well as the Web2 conglomerates, are having their initiatives around the metaverse. Even also big four consulting firms are heavily pushing the metaverse initiatives, right? So whether that's EY, Deloitte, or PwC, right, as well as others, they have dedicated teams to these topics. And what I actually realize is now most of these traditional players, and I'll get to the Web3 companies in a second, you know, they actually do have a strong understanding. I remember like a few years ago when I was, you know, doing projects in the security token space, when you were speaking to people from the traditional industries, often, I think, you know, you also with a background in traditional industry, you are one of the exceptions, actually, who understood the industry, but there were a lot of conversations with people which actually did not, right? But now I feel like most of these traditional players do. They have smart people on their teams, and I'm against, you know, this kind of notion where, you know, people in Web3 often say, oh yeah, we don't want to work with the traditional guys, right? If you want to have adoption, and then you always need to bridge. So I think there's a lot of traction on that side from businesses, even large machine producers and companies. I cannot mention the names yet, but that we're currently talking to, that are really the most traditional companies that you can imagine, are interested still in this stage of the market in the metaverse. And then, of course, around the Web3 space, you have, so to say, the blue chip meta worlds, like Decentraland, Sandbox. You have, of course, Sonium Space as one of the most advanced VR worlds. You have Spatial, which I specifically like. It's more Web 2.5, if you wish, although I'm not the biggest fan of this term, but it's a good definition, because it's very plug and play, and the experience is very Web 2. It's very easy to enter Spatial. Once you're in Spatial, there are still some limitations, and it may occur that there's some bugs here and there, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's always like this, right? With new technologies, and so therefore, I think Spatial, for instance, is also something that is quite strong. So yeah, there are those kind of players, I feel like, that are out there. Then there's, of course, a vast amount of other very interesting worlds and players. Also from the AR side, there's OVR. They're also you know, I've known them for a while, and they're doing great stuff around with AR, for instance, and kind of bringing that into the metaverse and the meta worlds even, right? So they work also with, for instance, the other worlds like Decentraland, Sandbox, and so on. Then there's also the entire JDO ecosystem, right, around AR. So that's also quite interesting. And then I feel like something that, as a last point, is also quite demanded is actually having your own instance of a meta world. So that's not necessarily within one of these Web3 worlds or also Web2 worlds, right? Like Roblox or Fortnite, which, just on a side note, also can anytime flip the switch in terms of integrating Web3, right? So yeah, that's also just a matter of time. And then all of a sudden we have hundreds of millions of users, right? And even they are talking positively about the metaverse when there was like this article, the metaverse is dead. Even I think I'm not sure who it was, someone from, I think, Roblox or Fortnite, one of the CEOs there. I'm sorry, I'm not really sure which one it was, but they were also posting about, hey, the metaverse is not dead. We have over 600 million users, and even in their social media posts tagging Web3 worlds like Sandbox, right? So I feel like that collaboration is coming closer, and it's a good sign. But yeah, going back to the individual worlds, it's kind of like, if we generally look at the evolution of the web, in the beginning, the intranet was also much more adopted, so to say, than the World Web, if you wish, right? And I see kind of that trend also happening, where a lot of people are more demanding that right now, more internal use cases to start with, right? That are not, really that connected. And that's okay. And then we are gradually moving kind of toward, hopefully at least, this global interoperable ecosystem.
Thanks for the explanation. Maybe for our listeners, we will also include like a few names in the show notes below, so that you can have a look onto all the websites of the names which Nicolas mentioned before. So because it has been a lot, and there are a lot of players which are interesting, maybe to have a deeper look into them. And you travel a lot of the world in the last years, or the last year, to see people at different places and talk about the metaverse. What is your look around the world when you look at the metaverse? Which parts of the world are maybe the most ahead? Where do we have good regulations? And what is a good place where you see like the trend is going? Because sometimes you have places who are moving ahead. I think if you look at the Arabic countries, they are like really bullish on the metaverse and on the crypto part. And then you have other continents such as Europe, which are looking more at the regulation parts. If you look at the crypto regulations with MiCAR and stuff like that in the EU pilot regime, where do we see the different countries, the different continents at? And maybe also, like, we have a lot of German listeners. For the German listeners, where Germany at the metaverse part?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's it's a good question there. I feel like globally right now, generally around Web3, just in this like moment, the most momentum, I would say, even is actually in Hong Kong. I was just there recently, and the amount of high quality contacts, disruptive, innovative players, startups, from Southeast Asia, mainland China, regulatory, let's say, opening. I would say the momentum, just like right now, is actually there. Also around the metaverse topic, I met with various large players there, from the banking ecosystem and others that are entering the space and looking for use cases, often with, let's say, kind of these spin-offs or startups that they're founding, right? So that's a huge trend that I'm seeing. But I would say actually that is an ecosystem that's really booming at the moment. In general, I think overall Asia is probably the most advanced market as a whole. South Korea, also from a government side, is quite supportive around the metaverse topic. Singapore, while right now, of course, they're a bit more hesitant after everything that happened, also with 3AC and so on. They're still a great destination. I would say more from a finance perspective than metaverse specifically, but also the MAS there. I met with them, the regulator. They're very educated, very supportive of projects in general. More from a finance, right, as I mentioned, or security token side as well, and CBDCs is a hot topic there as well. But yeah, I feel like Asia in general is a huge pioneer. Then I believe that on the other hand, also as you mentioned, the Arabic countries, mainly UAE, and now also as of recently, much more increasingly Saudi Arabia, are heavily pushing the metaverse. I feel like though often metaverse topics in UAE and Saudi Arabia maybe not always directly related to, so to say, Web3. So often it's more just virtual use cases that are not directly related to Web3 yet. But that's okay, right? It's a process to get there, and often the Web3 integrations are just very difficult, right? From a regulatory side, I think over the last 3 to 5 years, they actually have been the strongest in terms of support and building an ecosystem. The momentum, as I mentioned right now, is actually in Hong Kong, I believe, but kind of the last 3 to 5 years, it was at least, and over a longer perspective probably is there at the moment. Then I feel like Europe, right? Europe is one of the most fragmented markets, I think, around the metaverse topic, at least how I experience it from a startup perspective. In Asia, and especially the Hong Kong ecosystem, Sandbox, for instance, is super strong, right? In Latin America and North America, you have Sandbox, you have Decentraland, you have Spatial, which are quite strong. And in Europe, you have a lot of more, like you have, of course, these players, but then you have also a lot of small but high quality meta world startups, so to say, right? That I feel like that are, especially in terms of the culture, fashion, art, right, around these industries. France is a huge hub. I feel like around that. Obviously, the Sandbox also has the headquarters there, right? Then I think Germany specifically, I feel like Germany, also the entire Web3 space is fragmented, right? You have the startups in Berlin, you have the finance hub in Frankfurt, and then you have kind of also a crypto community in Munich, right? I feel like generally Germany is always culturally a bit more fragmented. Therefore, I feel like around the metaverse topic, it is quite similar. Actually, I was speaking with my co-founders the other day that we also really want to, as a strategy, more engage also within the German market, because I feel like often you have German startups or founders that leave Germany, right? And don't really focus too much on the German market itself, because it can be sometimes quite bureaucratic, quite slow, right? And that's often true. At the same time, there is still a lot of interest and value in Germany as a market. So it's definitely something that I believe, as always, it would take a bit more time than maybe in other regions, but it's definitely coming, and there is definitely interest and a high level of understanding. But I feel like where in other places there are a few clear market leaders, in Germany that's not yet the case. So that's an opportunity, of course, as well, right? That, to be quite frank, also we want to step in further. As Frankfurt, for instance, for us is also a hub, right? I mean, we are operating internationally, but Frankfurt, of course, is a hub, and there's quite some interest also, for instance, in Switzerland and other German-speaking regions around the topic growing, also from a finance side. Then North America, I would say, as I mentioned, you have Decentraland, you have Spatial, you have Sandbox also, which is quite strong through IP-related collabs, right? Let's say with Snoop Dogg and others. So they have strong collaborations in the music industry there, especially Bertrand, their IP lead on that side is heavily pushing that with his background in the music industry. So I feel like North America in terms of adoption is they're always generally, like US, they're always like quite fast, right, with adoption. At the same time, they always tend to make their own regulatory hurdles, so to say, to surmount. So, but they're at least dealing with the topic also from a regulatory side. I mean, the EU, right? I had mentioned it before, is also now heavily pushing initiatives around the metaverse. I feel like more there, the EU is actually more unified, for instance, and individual Asian jurisdictions are also more unified, whereas in the US it's a bit more, let's say, ambivalent again, right? Where you have different perspectives. You have, of course, all the Silicon Valley big tech firms that have a lot of power, right? But so far have not really succeeded that much. But I think also on that aspect, it's just a matter of time. Although I believe that they will be more hardware providers than software, so to say. Where so far they have mainly been software providers often, right? Maybe Apple also heavily on the hardware side, but the others more software. And I feel like for the metaverse specifically, they will have more of a hardware play, right? As they, so to say, get older in age, and startups, hardware is much more costly, and for startups it's much more difficult, right? At the same time, these big techs may not be able to compete on a software level with the startups and the fastly growing innovations there. And then you have Latin America, which for us is also a huge hub, right? So to say, an ecosystem where I feel like especially creativity and the creative economy as a whole is quite adopted and strong there, right? Where you also have Decentraland, of course, with Decentraland actually or mainly originating from Argentina, for instance, right? So most of the founders are from there. What I actually like about Decentraland, for instance, is that they are striving for truly, decentralization. And so basically they are quite strong in Latin America. Specifically, Sandbox also has a presence. Of course, Artur, right, the co-founder, is also from Argentina. So actually Argentina is quite the Web3 hub even, right? A lot of ETH OGs, a lot of people from the MakerDAO communities and other tier 1 protocols, right? So it's a very strong ecosystem also from educational side. Colombia, for instance, where my co-founder Camilo is from, is also quite strong, especially around fashion, right, and artists, as we are seeing right now. So I think in terms of creativity, actually, Latam, I feel like is one of the strongest out there. And you have mainly Decentraland, which actually I would say has the biggest adoption. And then, of course, you have Sandbox, Spatial, and other players that also are present like everywhere, right? But yeah, I feel like that's kind of the ecosystem there. And then Africa, right? I feel like especially West Africa, countries like Nigeria and Ghana also, but especially Nigeria are quite strong on the crypto adoption in general, right? And therefore, also the metaverse topic is picking up. I feel like especially on an educational side, that's where a lot of interest is, because education also is one of the strongest. Actually, I think education and events are probably the most adopted and successful use cases around the metaverse, which, for instance, especially in Western Africa is quite strong, right? Where also you have, so to say, the usual suspects, but I feel like there's not yet that clear market leader, so to say, like in other regions. So there's still also a bit room for a few of those to position itself. Of course, Facebook/Meta is anyway quite strong. So maybe they also have a positioning there. But yeah, we'll see at the end. Generally, I feel like the experience, regardless of which world you go into, whether it's those Web3 worlds that I mentioned, or of course also Web2 worlds that may have so to say, entered the Web3 realm. It will be just like moving from one app to the other, or one basically website to the other. That's how we will also eventually move throughout these worlds, right? I also feel like AI in general will play a huge part in terms of allowing more customized meta worlds, right? Also based on 2D visuals. For instance, there's interesting things like Nerf technology that allows you to transform 2D visuals, right, into 3D worlds. I think that's quite powerful because it kind of allows you to travel back in time and think about, for instance, let's say in Germany, there's a demographic change, you know, large elderly populations, right? And it just keeps growing. And if you allow, for instance, them, which, yeah, I think maybe actually Web 2 was too difficult sometimes for them to enter. If they can just enter 3D worlds, right, which look like, I don't know, the 1950s, that is something that could be quite interesting for them as well, right? So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going to happen. And also the more, you know, this industry moves forward, the more the regional, so to say, differences will most likely kind of, you know, yeah, not become completely abolished, but, you know, it will be more aligned on a global perspective. But of course, there will always be jurisdictions, especially that also push positive innovation forward on a regulatory side, that will be kind of the leaders in that space. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I believe we have seen a lot of that stuff also on the internet, where some countries were leaders, and now we're looking at the same protocols. We can communicate with each other. So, and I think this is a development we will see with other technologies, Web3, Metaverse, crypto, and so on. Also, like right now, as you mentioned, we see some different continents, different regulations, different hubs, and maybe the world will grow more and more together within the time. Maybe you mentioned like the places you also been, and the how different cultures and how different regulations work. Maybe you can describe what does Meta Game Hub do for their clients, and how do you help your clients to establish themselves in the metaverse? What are the services you offer? And maybe you can dig a little bit deeper into that.
No, perfect. Yeah. So basically, Meta Game Hub has two layers actually, right? So, and I keep the back end layer a bit shorter. Basically, we are aggregating data standards, right? Which then allows us to build basically the picks and shovels of the metaverse on top of these data standards. What that specifically means is that we are building a platform that kind of streamlines the process of investing, building, and experiencing the metaverse. So from the investing side, right, which is often the entry point, so to say, right, you enter, you make purchases, you acquire maybe lands, which is kind of the equivalent of a website, right? The infrastructure domain or assets. And there we have complementary analytical tools powered by AI that allow you to, for instance, hover over a heat map, finding classes of undervalued lands, overvalued lands, have appraisal for individual plots, and just generally help you better make purchasing decisions. Where actually in the metaverse should you go, what's going on, right? So we apply, for instance, neighboring weight techniques, like in traditional real estate. Actually, we extract transaction history, we take into account, of course, the traffic and other metrics to really provide more transparency around you know, is also the pricing within the metaverse. So anyone that's interested in acquiring a land, positioning themselves, wanting to know where actually should you buy a land, where should you go, you know, can utilize our analytical dashboard to make these purchasing decisions. Apart from that, we also, of course, take this data, push it on chain. We have chaining node, so even DeFi protocols could utilize it. We make sometimes integrations into B2B platforms, right, with this data. So it's kind of like a hub around this analytical data from the investing side, where the user journey is really coming to this heat map, right, where we aggregate the different worlds, and then you have the different options in terms of the analytics that you can leverage and choose from. This is something that especially helps businesses that want to go into the metaverse but don't know where to go and what to purchase, right? Really make these better decisions, as well as, of course, individuals that want to kind of have their own land and position themselves and something built on top of it. Then on the other hand, basically the building part revolves around really providing, so to say, builder tool set, right, for builders, where right now you have basically all these fragmented and kind of misaligned meta worlds, which have different standards in terms of the blockchain, which have different scene standards, right? So as a creator, it's quite hard to come in because you always have to limit yourself to one of these individual worlds, right? As a business, it's quite hard because you don't yet know, first of all, which of these worlds will succeed, right? And as you often want to position yourselves in multiple, right? So therefore, what we are providing is a universal building infrastructure, right? Where basically on the one hand, you have a market that you can choose from. So you want to have a headquarter, for instance, in a different world, right? You can go there, cherry pick what you want. It's very modular, and then you can deploy it into the different worlds. And complementary, especially for developers, we also have a builder tool that allows you to create different scenes, right? That you then can deploy into different worlds. We started there with Decentraland because it has the most development flexibility and the biggest need around this specific use case. But we're implementing, for instance, a universal scene standard. So really you can come in, create and experience, and then you can choose, okay, which of these worlds you want to have it. Do you maybe just want to have it in your own world, right? So really allowing that flexibility on a builder side. Or if you're a business and you already kind of know what you want, you can just cherry pick it from the market and deploy it with the help of the builder, right? So really having an end-to-end solution around the building side, where it's not about us creating everything. It's more about, for instance, also working with the right partners in industry that we integrate into the builder platform and tool set at the end, right? Like, for instance, for commerce, you have Boson Protocol, which is focusing on Web3 commerce, right? That we integrate, right? So it's not us having to develop the commerce solution, but actually you as a user being able to choose which kind of direction you want to go to, and then you can leverage and deploy that based on our platform, right? And then the third pillar, sorry.
Maybe to dig a little bit deeper into the understanding there. So maybe if I'm a software developer in using your tools, it basically I develop on like my own computer or my own cloud and develop something, and I test it there, and then I can push it to different productions. It's basically that I can say I can push it to Decentraland, I can push it to Sandbox, and it's basically converting the code so I can deploy it on different production environments. Would that be a good understanding for people who are listening to understand exactly what you're doing?
Yes, exactly. That's a perfect summary, right? It's really all about streamlining the building part in an end-to-end solution. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then you have kind of following that the subsequent part of experiencing, right? Which is more about individual co-creations that we do together with IP holders, brands, as well as communities, where whether that's where we do different experiences around events, digital fashion launches, esports community hubs, right? For instance, with Fitchin, there it's really more about the community building part, and also the individual fun experiences that we provide with the help of our tools, of course, but together with partners in different industries that we team up with. So whether that's in the traditional space, like consulting firms, financial institutions, IP holders in sports, particularly esports, but also beyond that, fashion, right, art and other industries, or also together with Web3 companies that have, let's say, interesting tool sets that complement our offering, or generally are part of the Metaverse community, right? And at the end, it's all about unifying the space for us, right? And providing tangible use cases. So while on the builder side, right, everything is more standardized, and either you choose from modules, right, that you want to deploy, or you create something with the builder yourself. the experiencing part is more like individual experiences that we facilitate also with our team together with these partners, right? And there I feel like the biggest demand right now, as I mentioned, is actually events, phygital events often also, right? As well as basically the respective apart from the event side, it's the educational side that is quite strong, where the education part can also serve as a funnel respectively to onboard more people to the metaverse. And at the end, education is always the key. I think it's not the consumers and users that need to be educated, they should just use, right? But of course, especially the builders, which I count every business too, right? They are definitely quite heavily focusing on that pillar at the moment. Yeah.
Perfect. Maybe for our listeners, phygital is physical and digital. Maybe you could describe what does an event which is physical and digital look like?
Yes, so phygital is something that I think that basically, yeah, it's not been around for too long. And an event, basically, a phygital event is you have a physical event, right, that kind of has a digital twin, if you wish, right? So a version of that event happening in a virtual world, like spatial or Decentraland. And this allows basically, on the one hand, you as an attendee of the physical event to also join a digital community and participants, right, and have kind of a mixed reality experience, right? Whether that's powered by AR or VR, that kind of, it just creates a more disruptive and diverse way of learning about something, or just having a party, right? Whatever it is. And on the other hand, as a solely digital attendee, you that may not be able to travel to that specific event, but still wants to participate and not just watch a live stream of it, right? That allows basically then to have a much more engaging participation, right? And kind of converging, so to say, the realms of physical and digital. Of course, the more also the hardware gets better, so to say, the more disruptive these experiences will become. And it's something that I feel like allows, like the internet in general has kind of created this global playground, right? And digital, I think experiences are perfectly aligning with this, because it allows them an even more tangible way of engaging with people digitally, right, from all over the world. And kind of feeling, but while you're maybe in your home, your office, your bedroom, wherever, right, you are still able to participate in a global and fun experience, regardless of where you are. And I think it's a very amazing thing. And it creates a much more engaged event, right? That if it was, for instance, solely digital in a 2D environment, a lot of the individual conversations and one-on-ones would not happen. So for instance, just as a simple example, right, sometimes our tech team does digital meetings, right? So some of them are in person together, others are just meeting digitally, right, at the same time. And that if it was just in a simple Zoom or Google Meets, people would not have individual conversations, right? They would have the call and then they leave. But through this, they actually, after maybe the main topics are covered, they walk around the location, for instance, the spatial office that we have, and have individual one-on-one conversations, right? Which they would usually have maybe if they were all together in a normal office, but since everything is global and remote, that does not happen. That's where the phygital part can provide a lot of value, right? Because at the same time, they can see what's going on also in maybe the office, right? And what are people doing there? And it breaks the barriers, the borders, so to say, between physical and digital. We also did, for instance, a large event in Bogota around the DEF CON last year. We had over 1,500 people there. And at the same time, we hosted the event in Decentraland, for instance, where we had also many attendees, right? And it was amazing. People could be at the real event in the physical one, and at the same time, you know, engage with the people that are just joining virtually, and vice versa, right? And it's an innovative let's say way of just further creating more social experiences online at the end, yeah, and offline.
Yeah, I think there we see that the working culture is changing. Like you have to look at different kind of events. You have to look at different kinds of how to involve people, how to, yeah, connect the best of both worlds together. Maybe another question, like when Metaverse started, it was a lot about all the crypto coins. Like the people basically got into the Metaverse because they thought they could get rich, like buying the crypto of these different metaverses. You have like Mana for Decentraland, you have Sand for Sandbox, and maybe the question: what role does crypto still play? And also like with the question like of gaining money, when I enter the metaverse as a company right now, how can I earn money? How can I position myself that it's not like a whole only research experience, but also an experience to gaining money? And maybe as an individual, is there still places to gain money? And I'm not talking about the pump and dump schemes. I'm completely against that, where groups like get together and just say we all buy this coin and we try to get as many people into that and then dump the coin, and it like a lot of people lose money, a few people gain money. That's not what I'm talking about. You have play to earn, different metaverse games and stuff like that. Maybe you can combine this question all together, like the role of crypto with like gaining money as a company or gaining money as an individual within the metaverse.
Mm-hmm. So I think basically around that topic, actually, you know, right now, from an investor perspective, if you're investing into the metaverse and you believe in the topic, right? I feel like now, as always, when there's, so to say, blood on the street, is a good time to invest. You know, so I feel like on that side, yeah, there's a lot of fear right now around the metaverse, a lot of doubt. At the same time, you have still the biggest companies dealing with this topic and pushing it forward. You have great startups and innovators. You have regulators, right? So yeah, it's more like a momentum that changed toward the negative, right? And the prices obviously of assets went down. But yeah, it's a good opportunity there. But of course, no financial advice, I have to say. But I strongly believe that there's a lot of opportunities at the moment. Where actually the metaverse can be quite an interesting topic. Also from a business perspective, if you want to start a startup, right? I do believe that you know, after the cleanse that happened, there's a lot of room for serious use cases to really push metaverse adoption forward. That you know, actually is also an opportunity in that sense to make money if you wish, right? To build a startup and a product, right, at the end that is actually needed, or people may not know they need it, but will need it once it's out, so to say. So I think on these two levels, definitely, if you're a business generally right now selling products in the metaverse, actually something that has been like, I'm actually happy that we didn't choose, let's say, for instance, to build a world, like a siloed world, because then basically we would be fully dependent on that. But when it comes to, so to say, tools, so to say, you know, picks and shovels, there is still a lot of interest around that, especially on the B2B side. I think I mentioned it before, the retail side right now is a bit let's say calm, let's say, or yeah, not calm, but it's kind of like even almost yeah, I don't want to say non-existent, because there is if you look at the Web2 world, hundreds of millions of users, right? and also in the Web3 worlds, there is still some traction. But if you look at the media right now, you would think it's dead, right? There's these articles and everything. So I think if in terms of making money on that perspective, the B2B side is actually where the party is right now, so to say. So yeah, that's kind of from an investor, from a business, and from a business perspective, where I think you know, you there's the opportunities there. And then of course a lot of the different worlds, specifically for instance Sandbox, they're constantly doing a lot of let's say kind of loyalty based programs into a direction where you are incentivized for trying things out, for engaging within the sandbox, right? So from a consumer level, you know, also in Decentraland and other worlds, you know, there's POAPs, you can claim assets, things like this, right? So there is still also value that you can extract there more from a consumer perspective if you engage within these ecosystems. Actually, we are also working on a more interoperable and let's say, yeah, agnostic loyalty system that connects the different worlds with each other, right? And that creates kind of like a playbook onboarding, a plug and play onboarding to these different worlds through the hub, right? As so far we've also focused more on the B2B side, but we want to also now engage more than in the B2C aspects, to really push you know, and be on the forefront of the next level of adoption. So yeah, a lot of opportunities, I would say, that are still out there. You just need to so to say know where to look. And of course, anyone that's interested, right, from the listeners, I'm always happy to you know, help and guide into the right directions.
Perfect. Then maybe coming a little bit to the end, I would ask you, what is your outlook like for the next years? How do you think, or how do you personally believe, you know, financial advice for investments, for sure, but how do you believe will the metaverse evolve, or what will the next steps be, and maybe an outlook for maybe the next year and also the next 5? Where do you think we're heading towards?
Yeah, I strongly believe that first of all, you know, the hardware will actually be a market that you know, has been underlooked a bit, but will now also, with Apple entering the race, be huge in the short term, right? I do think that also still we need more, like everyone now almost in the world has a cell phone, right? I think that of course in terms of that, there still needs to happen a lot in terms of the hardware for it to be able that everyone can actually afford it, right? But I think that's going to be a key part. Though, however, more on the right now the yeah, conglomerate side, so to say, not necessarily the startups per se, as there's not so many startups in that so to say sphere. Then I believe that the data infrastructure standards, right, are going to be much more advanced in terms of especially the infrastructure, where of course we are pushing that heavily, also together with our partners, and are aiming to also engage with regulators on that topic as well, which then allows subsequently the right yeah, seamless and interoperable applications to be built. So the infrastructure standards for the businesses, right? So you have on one end the hardware improvements, you have the infrastructure standards from a data perspective for businesses to engage in the space that are currently being built, and then in maybe 3 to 5 years from now, it will allow really scalable retail focused applications to properly kick off, as it often is with technology. It just kind of needs that one inflection point, let's say like the launch of ChatGPT 3, right, with AI, then all of a sudden everyone is back on that topic and using it and so on, right? And it's very hard to predict, of course, what and when that will be. But yeah, I strongly believe that we will have such an inflection point in the next 3 to 5 years that will really bring metaverse adoption to the next level. Of course, also as the market cycles with crypto and traditional markets are becoming hopefully more positive again, at some point that will also drive more capital again toward the topic from retail side as well as from a VC side, right? So venture capital is also right now a bit more hesitant around the topic, but will increasingly get back to it. And that, of course, then drives further innovation and startups and respectively products. And then, there's going to be another wave of retail focused applications that basically will push the metaverse forward.
That sounds like a promising future, like interesting top times ahead. If people want to contact you or to work with you, because we also have listeners of different companies here, how can they contact you?
Yeah, so basically, they can either DM me on Twitter at the Nicolas Weber. They can send me on a Telegram message, although sometimes there's a stream of Telegram messages, so maybe a reference to the podcast would be good. It's the same as my Twitter handle. Then they can also DM me on LinkedIn, or they can also contact me through, for instance, the forum that we have on Meta Game Hub, or they can also contact through partners, right, through the team. So there's different channels, and I'm always happy to answer, and I try to be on top of every message. So yeah, these are kind of, I think, the best channels. And of course, if they're connected to you, they can also reach out and ask for an introduction, and then you can of course connect us.
Yeah. Perfect. Then thank you very much, Nicolas, for this interesting conversation. I think I knew a little bit about the metaverse, and I learned quite a lot more today. And I hope our listeners also learned a lot more. And for our listeners, subscribe to us on YouTube, on Spotify, or wherever you're listening to us. And we're looking forward to you that you listen to us in the next episode. Thank you, Nicolas.
Thank you so much, Stefan. It was a pleasure.